You were never meant to be anything, just invisible support. That's what my mother whispered the day she took the witness stand, right before she looked me in the eye and smiled for the cameras. I didn't flinch, because that wasn't the first time she used her love like a weapon. My name is Jessamine Rowe, and if they thought dragging me into court would be the final insult, they clearly forgot who taught me how to fight without raising my voice. I never imagined the day would come when I'd walk into a courtroom and see my own parents sitting on the opposite side of the aisle. Portland's morning rain slid down the glass doors of the courthouse, turning every reflection into something uncertain. My face looked calm enough, though a small, traitorous part of me trembled underneath the surface. 3 years of working cases had trained me to keep a steady posture under pressure. I'd faced liars, fraudsters, and people who thought the law was something to bend rather than follow. But none of that prepared me for this, for the sight of them, sitting side by side like they were posing for a charity gala instead of a civil lawsuit. My mother lifted her chin first. Her eyes swept over me the way someone glances at a smudge on a mirror. Then she rolled them, slow and deliberate, the kind of gesture that said more than any insult ever could. "You actually came dressed for court? That's cute," she murmured, a private dagger meant just for me. My father chuckled under his breath. "Let's hope she doesn't embarrass herself again." I said nothing. Silence had always been the language they hated most, the one thing I could still control. When I stepped inside the courtroom, Judge Elliot Carr looked up from his bench. His pen froze midair, his eyes narrowing for half a second before recognition softened them. No one else noticed, but I did. It had been 3 years since we'd last worked together on a state corruption case. Back then, he'd told me I was the only one who still gives a damn about ethics. Now, his voice carried through the still air. "We meet again, Ms. Rowe." My parents glanced at each other, confused, as if the words didn't fit the daughter they remembered. And standing there, between the people who gave me life and the man who once taught me what justice looked like, I realized this wouldn't just be another case. It would be a trial of blood versus integrity, and for the first time in my life, I intended to win. I grew up in a house that only cared about appearances. In our Oregon suburb, the Rowe family name looked perfect from the outside. Fresh paint, trimmed hedges, charity dinners polished with fake smiles. Inside, it was all noise and emptiness. My mother, Linda, lived for attention. She glided through fundraisers in silk gowns, her laughter rehearsed for the camera flashes that followed her. My father, Martin, loved his next big deal. Always one miracle investment away from proving he wasn't just another man with debts and delusions. And me? I was the quiet one, the wrong tone in their carefully composed song. My brown hair, my calm voice, my preference for books over parties. Everything about me felt like an offense against their image. I still remember the night I told them I'd earned a scholarship to Yale. My father didn't even look up from his whiskey. "Law? Why law? Jess, there's no money in it." My mother laughed softly, cutting sharper than she knew. "People study law when they can't sell or create. It's sad. Really." I didn't argue. I packed what I could into one small suitcase, took $200, and the only thing that mattered, my grandmother's photo. She was the one who once told me, "You'll be the one to fix the way people see this family." Yale was supposed to be just a chance at a future, but it became the place where my life split in two. That's where I met Professor Howard Winslow, the man everyone whispered about, the one who lost his career and his marriage for refusing to protect a corrupt politician. He looked untouchable, even bitter at first, until the day he stopped me after class and asked, "Do you believe justice can survive without kindness?" I said, "No. One without the other becomes cruelty." He smiled for the first time. "Then you might just survive this profession." After that, weekends no longer belonged to me. I spent them in his home by the river, helping him edit old case files, pulling weeds from the garden, listening as he replayed the echoes of a career built on hard truths. Somewhere in those quiet afternoons, without meaning to, I became the only person he trusted. And one evening, while sorting through old papers, I found a signed promissory note tucked into one of his legal journals, my father's name scrawled across the bottom. The date was years before, the amount large enough to ruin anyone. Winslow had lent him money for a failed real estate venture. It hit me then, the irony so deep it almost burned. The man my parents despised had once saved my father from bankruptcy. And now, unknowingly, he was saving me too. When Howard Winslow's heart finally gave out, I was there. He lay in the old recliner near the window, sunlight cutting through the curtains in thin, forgiving lines. His hand trembled when he reached for mine. "Promise me," he whispered, "you'll never trade integrity for comfort, kiddo." I promised. I didn't realize then how soon I'd be tested. A week later, his attorney gathered a few of us in that same house overlooking the Willamette River. The will was simple, written in his own hand: the property, the book royalties, and a $2.4 million scholarship fund, all placed in my care. Not for spending, but, as he wrote, to keep teaching those who choose honesty over convenience. I cried quietly, not for the money, but for what it meant, that he trusted me enough to leave his legacy in my hands. The story reached the local papers by evening. Headlines twisted the facts, turning respect into rumor. My phone rang past midnight. My mother's voice came sharp and cold. "You let that old man manipulate you. This is embarrassing." "He didn't manipulate me," I said. "He raised me." The line went dead. 3 days later, a court summons arrived. My parents were suing me for coercing an elderly man, and the name printed on their legal representation made my stomach drop. Harold Fisk. Fisk, the same attorney Winslow had fired years ago for falsifying evidence. The same man who swore he'd destroy him one day. It all made sense now. Fisk wanted revenge, and my parents wanted money. They'd found each other, 3 people bound by resentment, ready to dig up a dead man's honor if it meant filling their own pockets. I stared at the lawsuit in my hands, and for the first time since Howard's death, I felt anger, not grief, not fear, just anger so pure it steadied me. They thought this would shame me, break me, make me small again. They had no idea what kind of woman their contempt had built. The summons arrived halfway through a Monday meeting, a single sheet of paper, thin, harmless-looking, but heavy enough to drag the past back with it. At the top, in bold, plaintiffs, Martin and Linda Rowe. Defendant, Jessamine Rowe. And below that, the charge, undue influence and financial exploitation of a mentally impaired elder. I stared at those 2 words, mentally impaired, until they blurred. Howard Winslow had been sharp until the very end. He corrected punctuation in his will, annotated legal journals, debated court reforms with more clarity than half the judges I knew. But facts didn't matter here. My parents didn't need truth. They needed a story the world would believe. A daughter manipulating a lonely old man? I folded the document and looked out the window of the Justice Department. Portland rain slid down the glass. Slow, cold, deliberate. It made me wonder if justice had started moving that way too. By the afternoon, headlines were everywhere. Local attorney inherits millions from deceased professor. Family sues for manipulation. Hundreds of comments flooded in. Half called me a snake in a suit. The other half, the girl who stood by her mentor. Justice hadn't even started, but the verdict was already public. By evening, the department suspended me to avoid conflicts of interest. My phone went silent. My name turned toxic. I was being judged by the same system I once protected. That night, Miles came by. He sat beside me, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. "Jess, maybe take a settlement. They'll destroy you in the media." I laughed, dry and sharp. "Settle? For the truth?" He looked up, tired. "Truth doesn't pay the bills." When he left, The sound of the door closing felt like the last bit of air being sealed out of a room. I stayed there, staring at my desk, the lawsuit beside the handwritten notes Winslow used to make, one line circled twice. Family is a word lawyers love to misuse. He knew. Somehow, he knew this would happen. The next morning, I called Sarah, an old investigator from the department. She pulled the probate files for me. "Jess," she said carefully. "Someone added a medical statement claiming Winslow was mentally impaired. The signature belongs to a doctor who's been dead for 2 years." I gripped the phone tighter. "Who submitted it?" "Harold Fisk, same office seal he used before he was disbarred." The anger inside me didn't burn. It froze, sharp and focused. If that was true, this wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. It was fraud. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't only defending myself, I was about to fight the same corruption Winslow had spent his life standing against. The pre-trial hearing looked less like justice and more like a performance. My parents arrived dressed for tragedy, my mother in black silk and dark sunglasses, my father wearing his old business pin like it still meant something. Cameras flashed as they stepped from the car. The moment they reached the courthouse steps, she began to cry on cue. A reporter asked, "Do you forgive your daughter?" She lifted her head just enough for the lenses to catch the tears. "Forgive?" she said softly. "I'm just praying she remembers who raised her." I stood a few yards away, watching the scene unfold. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire. Once again, image was winning over truth. Inside the courtroom, Harold Fisk took the floor, moving like a man savoring revenge. "My clients seek only justice," he began. "They were robbed of affection and inheritance that rightfully belonged to them." He turned toward me, smiling that oily courtroom smile. "The defendant," he said, "is a professional manipulator. Even her career depends on deception." I didn't rise to it. I waited until he handed over a photocopied medical certificate, claiming Winslow had been unfit when signing his will. I glanced at it once and felt my stomach tighten. The seal was faint, too familiar. "Your exhibit is fraudulent, counselor," I said, my voice steady. That seal was retired in 2016. The room fell silent. Judge Carr raised an eyebrow. "Withdraw it," he ordered curtly. For the first time, I saw my mother lean toward my father, whispering something that looked like panic instead of poise. The famous eye roll, her trademark dismissal, was gone, replaced by fear. When the hearing adjourned, Judge Carr stopped me in the hallway. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Howard Winslow," I replied. He hesitated, then nodded. "He wrote to me once, said that if anything ever happened to him, someone named Jessamine would come looking for the truth." I froze. "He wrote you? When?" "The letter never reached me," Carr said, voice low. "Maybe it's still out there." By the time I left the courthouse, my phone buzzed with another headline: "Jessamine Rowe's case suspended for conflict of interest." I laughed under my breath, short, bitter. Every word in print was another brick around my name. But as I drove home through the rain, one thought kept cutting through the noise. If Winslow's letter still existed, it could be the key. And something told me it was waiting exactly where everything began, under the floorboards of the house by the river. I returned to the house by the Willamette that weekend. Rain whispered against the roof, the sound like Winslow's voice carried through time. The place was untouched, rows of law books, the silent piano. The oak tea table faded to gray. When I opened his study door, the floorboards groaned, one note different from the rest. I crouched down, flashlight steady, tracing each board until the fourth one gave way. Beneath the dust and old newspapers was a tin box sealed with brittle tape. Across the lid, in his uneven scrawl, were the words, "If they come for you, Jess, let this speak." Inside were a folded letter and a small USB drive. The note read, "Elliot Carr will know what to do. I sent him a copy, but in case it's lost, here's your shield." I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered. Winslow sitting at this very desk. Calm, deliberate. If this is being watched in court, it means those I once trusted, or thought I should, are trying to bury what they could never earn. Let it be known, this house, this fund, this name, I gave it to Jessamine Rowe, not because she asked, but because she never did. The tears came quietly. For the first time since the lawsuit began, I let gratitude win over exhaustion. That night, I printed the transcript and sent it to the court, marked, for Judge Carr only. The next hearing would not be family against family. It would be truth against greed. Near midnight, my phone rang. A man's voice, low and calm. If that video leaks, the foundation fund might disappear? I said nothing. Harold Fisk didn't have law anymore, only fear. The courtroom was full when the hearing began. My parents entered like tragic actors, eyes downcast, voices fragile. Fisk started, smooth as ever. My clients only wished to preserve the true legacy of Howard Winslow, a man misled in his final days. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I stood. Your Honor, the court deserves to hear Professor Winslow's words. Carr nodded. The lights dimmed. Winslow's face appeared on the screen, voice calm and steady. Jessamine Rowe stood by me in silence when others only showed up for the inheritance. The room went still. My mother's hand trembled. My father looked away. Fisk tried once more. Ms. Rowe? Did you love Professor Winslow beyond filial respect? I did, I said. He was the only adult who ever taught me what respect looks like. When I looked at my mother, she didn't turn away. Something between us broke without sound. During recess, she sat alone, eyes red. He thought you were better than us, she whispered. He didn't think, I said. He knew. And just like that, the war between us ended. Not in victory, but in truth. I no longer needed her belief. I only needed to remain who he knew I was. The courtroom was packed. Rows of cameras, reporters from national outlets, flashes cutting through the heavy air. I walked in holding the final document, a printed copy of Winslow's handwritten note attached to his will. The weight of it wasn't paper. It was closure waiting to happen. Judge Carr took his seat, his expression solemn, not doubtful anymore, just burdened. Before we proceed, he said, voice steady, this court has received new material confirmed by the Federal Archive. He held up a yellowed envelope, the real letter Winslow had sent years ago. He began to read. To Elliot Carr, if this ever reaches you, know I trusted Jessamine Rowe with more than assets. I trusted her with the ethic I no longer see in this profession. They will try to paint her as the thief, but she is my heir, not of blood, of character. The murmurs started instantly. Fisk's face went pale. My mother's composure cracked. My father stared at his empty hands as if watching his legacy slip through his fingers. Carr looked up. This court finds the will legally sound. The claims of undue influence are baseless. The estate remains with Ms. Rowe. Case dismissed. Silence fell like judgment itself. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just breathed, for the first time in years, freely. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed like bees around a broken hive. Microphones shoved toward my face, cameras flashing, everyone hungry for a headline that sounded like redemption. I gave them none. Integrity doesn't need a microphone, I said quietly. It just needs to be heard. Then I walked away. No interviews, no memoir, no podcast deal. Justice didn't need an audience, it just needed to stand. I went back to the house by the river, where the air still smelled faintly of old books and tea that had long gone cold. For the first time in months, silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like peace. 3 days later, my mother came. She stood beyond the gate, too proud to call my name. When I didn't open, she left an envelope on the steps, a photo of me at 8, in a paper graduation cap. Her younger hand rested on my shoulder. Half a hold, half a hesitation. I didn't cry. I placed the picture in an old box and labeled it, Things I've Outgrown. That night, an email arrived from Judge Carr. You've upheld the part of Howard I never could. There may be a bench opening in 2 years. I hope you'll consider. I closed the laptop and smiled faintly. For once, the future felt quiet, and perfectly enough. 2 years later, I sat behind the federal bench, the youngest judge in Oregon. My first case was a will dispute, a young woman accused by her relatives of winning an old man's affection for inheritance. When she entered, her hands trembling. I saw myself years ago. Did you stand by him when no one else did? I asked. She nodded. I nodded back. There was nothing more to say. That evening, I returned to the river house. The air was cool, the Willamette moving slow and sure beneath the gray sky. I sat by the old tea table, opened Winslow's last letter. The ink faded, but clear enough to read, Integrity always wins. Eventually, I took a pen and wrote beneath it, It did.